2022, a researcher in the UK plugged electrodes into 4 species of living fungi. What came back through the wire stopped his team cold. What they recorded wasn't random noise. It was structured, rhythmic, and disturbingly close to something we use every day: language. In the next 10 minutes, you're going to find out exactly what that signal was, why it's tearing the mycology world apart, and why the answer to this debate matters far beyond mushrooms. Stay with it, because the part most people miss, the detail that flips the whole argument, comes later. Let's start with what actually happened in that lab. The researcher was Andrew Adamatzky, a professor at the University of the West of England. He studies unconventional computing, using biological systems to process information. He's spent years running electrical signals through slime molds, through plants, through roots. But in 2022, he turned to fungi. He inserted microelectrodes into the mycelium, the underground thread network that connects mushroom clusters, and he waited. What he recorded were spikes, electrical spikes, firing in patterns, traveling through the fungal network at a rate of roughly 1 spike every few minutes. When he ran those spikes through linguistic analysis, the same kind used to study human vocabulary, he found up to 50 distinct signal types. 50. That's within range of the number of words an average spoken human sentence uses to carry meaning. Nobody's claiming mushrooms are writing poetry, but the structure of those signals, the pattern, the variation, the repetition, looked less like random electrical noise and more like encoded information. And here's where it gets complicated, because not everyone agrees on what information means when fungi are involved. You've probably heard of the Wood Wide Web. It's the idea, popularized by researcher Suzanne Simard, that trees communicate through fungal networks underground, that a mother tree can send carbon and nutrients to seedlings, that forests aren't collections of competing individuals, they're cooperative systems. It's a beautiful idea, and it became a cultural phenomenon. David Attenborough talked about it. It became the premise of Richard Powers' Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, The Overstory. It shaped how millions of people think about forests. There's just one problem. Some scientists think the story got too big for the evidence. A growing number of mycologists are pushing back hard, arguing that what we call communication in fungal networks is being dramatically overstated, that the metaphor ran ahead of the data. And their critique cuts right to the core of what the Adamatzky experiment is really showing. In 2023, a team of researchers published a review specifically targeting Wood Wide Web claims. Their argument wasn't that fungal networks don't exist. They clearly do. Their argument was about intent and direction. For communication to be communication, most scientists agree you need a sender, a receiver, and a signal that carries meaningful information between them. What the skeptics say is this: yes, carbon and nutrients move through mycorrhizal networks. Yes, electrical signals fire, but movement isn't the same as messaging. A river moves water downstream. That's not the river talking to the sea. The signals Adamatzky recorded, they could be metabolic, responses to moisture, temperature, damage, automatic reactions, not intentional transmission. This is the line the whole debate pivots on, and it's a line that's genuinely hard to draw because we're using human definitions of language to interrogate something that has been evolving for 500 million years without us. But here's what the skeptics can't fully explain away. If fungal signals were purely metabolic, purely internal maintenance, you'd expect them to stay local. Damage a section of mycelium, you get a response near the damage. Done. But that's not what researchers keep finding. In multiple studies, damage signals in fungal networks have been recorded traveling away from the site of damage, outward through the network, to connected organisms that weren't damaged at all. Those connected organisms then showed measurable changes: enzyme production, chemical shifts, responses that look functionally like preparation. Preparation for a threat they hadn't encountered yet. You can call that metabolic if you want, but when a signal leaves its origin point, travels a network, and triggers a functional response in a separate organism, that starts to look less like internal noise and more like a message with a destination. So if fungi are sending something, what are they sending it about? This is where Adamatzky's linguistic analysis becomes genuinely strange. When he mapped the spike patterns against models used for human language analysis, certain signal clusters appeared repeatedly, not randomly distributed, clustered, appearing in sequences. In linguistics, that's called lexical density, the tendency for meaningful units to appear in structured groups rather than isolated events. Now, and this matters, he did not claim the signals are language. He was careful about that. What he said was that the statistical properties of those signals resemble the statistical properties of language. That's a significant distinction, but it's also the kind of distinction that's very easy to blur, and in the media, it was blurred immediately. Headlines ran with, "Mushrooms have a 50-word vocabulary." That's not what the paper said, but it's also not nothing, because the underlying finding, stripped of the hype, is still sitting there, unexplained. And here's where the debate gets personal, because it's not just about mushrooms anymore. Here's what you need to understand about the stakes. If fungal networks are purely passive, nutrient pipelines, nothing more, then forest management stays roughly the same. You manage trees, you manage soil. Fungi are infrastructure. But if fungal networks are actively processing and transmitting information, even in a basic, non-conscious way, then every time you clear-cut a forest, you're not just removing trees. You're destroying a communication system that took centuries to build. One that, once gone, cannot be reassembled from seed stock and good intentions. The practical stakes of this scientific argument are enormous. Conservation policy, reforestation strategy, how we think about forest health at all. The debate about whether fungi talk isn't academic. It's a question with real consequences for real ecosystems. And right now, policy is running ahead of settled science in both directions. But before you decide where you land on this, there's one finding that almost nobody is talking about. And it's the one that should probably be leading every conversation about fungal intelligence. Here's the finding that rarely makes the headlines, and it's the one that reframes everything you've just heard. When ecologist Suzanne Simard deliberately stressed dying Douglas fir trees, stripping needles, introducing insects, she tracked what happened to their stored carbon using stable isotope tracing. She expected it to disperse, break down, scatter into the soil. Instead, roughly 40% of that carbon moved through the mycorrhizal network directly into neighboring trees. Not randomly, directionally. And here's what that means. A dying organism, in its final weeks, was redistributing what it had, not losing it to entropy, but channeling it through the network to what remained. Now, the skeptics will tell you that's passive, that carbon moves along concentration gradients, not by intention, and they might be right. But the same critics who dispute the Wood Wide Web haven't fully explained why the transfer is directional, why it moves toward living trees, rather than dispersing equally in all directions. That asymmetry is sitting in the data, unexplained. You can call it chemistry, you can call it physics, you can call it coincidence, or you can sit with the possibility that the forest has been running a system of resource management for longer than our species has existed, and we are only now building instruments sensitive enough to eavesdrop on it. So, do mushrooms talk? Honest answer, we don't know yet. What we do know is that fungal networks transmit structured electrical signals, that those signals travel beyond their origin point, that connected organisms respond to them in functional ways, and that the statistical pattern of those signals resembles, not equals, the structure of language. The skeptics aren't wrong to push back on overclaiming. Science needs that friction. But the people who've already closed the book on this, who've decided fungi are just pipes, might want to keep it cracked open. Because every time researchers build a more sensitive instrument and point it at the forest floor, they find something that wasn't supposed to be there. If this is the kind of question you want to keep pulling on, the stuff underneath the surface of what we think we know about fungi. Subscribe, there's more coming. And if you want to go deeper on the networks themselves, the relationship between mother trees and mycelium, and why that relationship matters, that video is next. The forest has been here for 450 million years. It was never waiting for us to understand it.